Serious, what's the worst culture shock you've experienced within your own country? Once my wife's family got comfortable enough to really be themselves around me. I was raised Irish Catholic and my family never acknowledged their problems or addressed grievances between each other. They just had another drink and held a grudge for decades. Not an exaggeration. My wife's family is very Italian and would scream at each other for 5 minutes and then just resume their lives like nothing had happened. I was afraid to speak for a little while. Fellow Irish Catholic here, I had a very similar experience with my girlfriend's Jewish family. They are a lot more open with their feelings and opinions. I have no idea how to act and end up just staring at the wall or nervously chuckling. Moving from NJ to PA, our town had a community day. The wife and I went by and asked how much everything was. When they told us free, not including local artists selling their stuff, or the hot dog vendor, I didn't understand. I replied something like, yeah, free, I get it, but how much? The concept of a town providing something for its residents without charging them was completely foreign to me. I moved from Utah to a non-Mormon state when I was 12. I'm not Mormon. I was shocked hearing kids my age swearing. Even saying something like oh my god was just mind-blowing to me. I live in NJ. A neighbor up the street was a Mormon who moved in from Utah. Within a week their kids were banned from associating with the other neighborhood kids. IDK why they wound up in NJ. I live in La. My job has me all over the city and surrounding areas. It's crazy how you can be in a city like Hacienda Heights 1 second with all Chinese billboards, Chinese markets, and 20 minutes later being doing a job in East La now every sign is in Spanish. Later I am out north of La about an hour drive. It's all desert and it's white people playing country music sitting on a porch. I live in a mostly white suburb with people driving Teslas etc. Just crazy when I first moved here the difference of areas in just a small distance. Los Angeles is a wild and ungodly place. I married up. My wife's family is wealthy. They think nothing of flying the entire family of 15 people to a week in Hawaii and paying for everything. It's interesting with her behavior. She's worked on it but she used to just go to the store and buy stuff without looking at the prices. She said she always was like that and her family growing up as well. That is what struck me, not Hawaii. I not so recently divorced after 20 years of marriage. The shock between what it was like to be single in the 90s versus 2010s was like waking up having been on a time machine blasted centuries forward in time. When I joined the army, all the people I'd ever known were from the Northeast, generally urban. To suddenly be in a basic training company with nothing but Texans, Ohioans, and people from very rural areas acquainted me quickly with how different our sets of assumptions were about how to interact with each other. My friends from urban Cleveland say there is a considerable difference between them and rural Ohioans even though they're split by only 50 miles sometimes. Can only imagine what it's like for someone from a different region in the US. Went to deep southern Louisiana once. Stopped at a gas station. Old lady was yelling at her granddaughter in French. They weren't from France. They were Cajun. I ended up marrying a Cajun gal. She has relatives that cannot speak English. Man, that's so cool. I'm serious. Love to know their history. I fish down there sometimes and it's amazing the isolation some of them have. Michigan transplanted in Appalachian TN. Had to learn that slow talk does not necessarily mean stupid and bless your heart. When spoken by a woman, often means well aren't you a dumb freak. I used to live in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I spent some time in the city and was very aware of drive-by shootings. In 2001, I was living in a rural community in West Michigan and was visiting a neighbor. Before I even identified the sound, I was lying on the living room floor with my infant daughter tucked safely under me. No one bothered to mention that the local gun club was 1/4 of a mile away and it was opening of Deer Day. Worst culture shock ever. I live across from a huge span of land a lot of people use as an all-around weapons range. It's not unusual to hear people blowing off dynamite or shooting .50 cal rifles, full auto rifles, etc. We haven't had a single violent crime that I'm aware of in about 20 years, but it can sound like a war zone here. Rural town in Ohio, USA. The first time I did a road trip outside of New England, my boyfriend and I were going through a toll plaza somewhere on the way to Georgia. The toll collector greeted us and said thanks, have a good day. Being from the Boston area, this really blew my mind. Moved to Texas from an urban city on the East Coast at age 22. I knew maybe 2 people my age who were married. In Texas, I swear to God 1/4 of all 22-year-olds are married. By 25 basically everyone is married or engaged. It was shocking having to check people's ring fingers at bars before trying to hit on them. Where I'm from, people don't even think about settling down until 27-28 and most marry around 29-30. You just happen to run into a lot of Aggies. They are nuts about getting married right out of school. 27-30 is more the norm for all my non-Aggie friends. Source: I am recently married 28-year-old Texan that has been to a million weddings this year. It's a little silly, but pool water up north is always kinda chilly and takes some adjusting to when swimming. Going down south one summer and getting into a warm pool without having to adjust so much was weird. Also, I've rarely seen the PA state flag outside of like school or government buildings here. Meanwhile, the Colorado state flag seems to be everywhere out there. The Denver airport was flooded with flag merch. PA needs a cooler flag. Texas. Here, Texas flag is everywhere. And at my daughter's school, they pledge allegiance to both the US and the Texas flag. I went from conservative charter school to public high school. It was insane how different it was. People dress more revealing. Guys all sagged thigh pants. Teachers and students cussed. People were open about freaking. It was very different. Mine is lame as heck, but I'm from Minnesota and we drove to SC, Iowa for my cousin-in-law's basketball game. The people there had almost southern accents. We were only like 6 hours away from where I live and their accents were completely different. And a southernish accent in Iowa? Compared to Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, pretty much everything else sounds southern. As an Asian American, I remember feeling like I was in a different country the first time I had dinner over at my white friend's house. First, his parents asked me to call them by their first names, which is unheard of in a Korean household. Second, they all ordered in pizza. My family never ordered food from a restaurant. We only ate out on very special occasions. And third, they all drank milk with their meal. WTF. The first 2 I get, but seriously, drinking milk with dinner was super weird to me. The only time I ever had milk was with my cereal. Going from a private school to a public school. You never realize how Midwestern you are until you move out of the Midwest. The first time I had dinner with my white boyfriend and his family, they made steak and it was cooked rare and I had only ever had steak well done and it really freaked me out. Going through native reservations is always a sobering reflection of our indigenous communities and the laws that made them the way they are. Dirt broken roads, overgrown fields, people drinking on their front porch, wild dogs and a big house for the chief. Same. Grew up next door to one of the worst ones in Canada. It's sad. Doubly so to hear my friends from the reserve talk about how the only way that they'd ever make something of themselves would be to leave the reserve and their family culture behind. Went on vacation with the family of a friend of mine. On the surface, both our families are upper middle class and white. However, the difference between Eastern European Jews from New York and Episcopalian WASPs from Canada. I spent the entire weekend hiding from them yelling at each other for no reason. I was raised where you don't raise your voice unless something is very, very wrong. This was not the case for them. Of course, we just consider that normal volume and pretty much never use what we consider to be raised voices. Moved from the PNW to the small rural Midwest. There was nothing more eye-opening than driving through Kansas with every other billboard being for a church, Bible verses, don't about your child and strip clubs. On the flip side, I moved from the Midwest to the PNW. The fact that people paid for parking was blasphemous at first. Also, the amount of homeless people was a pretty big shock too. Texan here, went up north, ordered sweet tea, they hadn't a clue. I just came back from a weekend in Texas, and holy frick your tea is like syrup. After a couple cups I figured out that the trick to enjoying southern sweet tea is that you must have ice in it. Moving from the Midwest to the Bible Belt, I was raised Christian. but it was beyond uncomfortable when my new friends told me I shouldn't be around single men unchaperoned to preserve my emotional purity, or hearing my roommate tell me that my anxiety disorder was because of demonic possession. The Deep South in the US. I'd traveled a lot around the country and been to 30 states before I spent any sort of time in the panhandle of Florida. I'm from Nick and it was almost a different country. Definitely true for Florida. The further north you go, the further south you get. Southern here, Florida is its own beast that none of the rest of us even pretend to understand. We're not even sure why it seceded. It just showed up at the convention at Montgomery and everyone was too scared to ask why. This is more a story of how I culture shocked someone else. I went to Puerto Rico recently to help with disaster relief with my church. We had a barracks style living situation with 30 dudes from all over the states and a couple communal fridges. We liked to grill and have beers after work, so one of the fridges was stacked with beers. Of course, being a church group, we didn't overdo it. We were very tame, but a native Puerto Rican old lady, who was also a member of our church and had volunteered to clean the barracks while we were working, almost had an aneurysm when she saw all our beer. She called up local church elders and told them we were living like debauched animals and that we had brought sin to Puerto Rico. She was inconsolable. Apparently alcohol is frowned upon among older, conservative Puerto Ricans. We didn't get in any trouble, and they told her she wasn't allowed to clean the barracks anymore. Guess she just wasn't used to seeing how much people of Mexican and German descent drink, lol. That's how it is. No one in my family drinks, and when they met my GF that drinks, they almost had a heart attack. I went to college in Maine and we decided to go hiking in northern Maine. We made a stop at a Walmart in Presque Isle and a young kid asked if I was a burn victim. I said no, and then he asked why my skin was brown, implying I was burned. That kid never saw a brown person in real life. His mom was embarrassed. I explained that people are different colors. The look on his face was priceless, but I felt awkward. Funerals, wakes. I come from New England and recently moved to the Midwest. I've never heard of bringing food to a wake or funeral. It's just something we've never done. Apparently the custom here is to bring food to the funeral home for the family because during the viewing, I've only ever known it to be a wake. The family is at the funeral home for 8 hours or so. Back home, the wake is only a couple of hours and then we usually go out to eat or back home where people will drop food off. I'm from the southeast and they had food at my grandfather's viewing. We call them viewings. That was the only viewing I had been to with food and I was really grossed out over it. I probably shouldn't have been, but the funeral home had a buffet on one side of the room and his open casket on the other. That some people eat salty tofu dessert instead of sweet one. And that some people are not afraid of cockroach because they have never seen southern cockroach, which are as big as a person's thumb. BTW, I am from China. Here in TX, cops will make you get out of the car, frisk you, search your car, and try to find a reason to arrest you just for going 5 miles per hour over. In NY, we parked illegally and NYPD came out and told us to fricking move. TBH, I was happier to oblige in NY. I live in a really awesome town in Canada, mid-small sized, gorgeous climate, tons of lakes and outdoor activities, wineries and orchards everywhere. It's like heaven. We live close to the downtown core, which is really convenient for us, but every day we are reminded of our growing homelessness problem. The homeless population is plagued with a lot of mental illness, addiction and crap luck in life. It's a shock to leave my comfortable, yet modest home and see people, literally a block away, that slept on the street and have to wash in the creek. It's heartbreaking. My mom always used to tell me that homeless people deserved it because they were druggies. No one deserves to sleep on the street. It's awful. Living in Newfoundland, I can go to just about any convenience store and pick up a case of beer. But when I went to Toronto, I went to about 3 or 4 different convenience stores before being told that I needed to go to the beer store to purchase beer. I passed the beer store a couple of times while walking around and assumed it was a store to buy supplies for making your own beer. We have a few of those stores in my city. Moved to the Nick area from Arizona a couple years ago when I was 26. It was weird seeing how much people actually care about where your family came from. Like Italian families actually prefer that you are with other Italians in relationships. When I went to my Italian girlfriend's sister's wedding, her dad would introduce me to their family members and say, "Don't worry, he has a nice Italian last name. What Papione?" I didn't think about it at first, but he was afraid they wouldn't like me because I don't look Italian, so he made sure they knew I was at least part Italian. Where I'm from, no one gave a crap who you were with or where your family originated from generations ago. It also surprised me that there is so much racism in NY. I thought it would be much more progressive than Arizona, but it sure as heck didn't feel that way. I hear people using racial slurs fairly often. Very surprising. Honestly, I never heard any racism in Arizona, but I hear it occasionally in NY. Moving from rural Alabama to the Bay Area for a job. I have family in Germany and it was less culture shock because Bavarians and redneck Alabamans are actually pretty similar, other than the language. When I was a kid, my teenage sister met and befriended another girl in junior high public school. We are upper middle white. She and her single mother were poor and black. My sister went off to private high school after that, but my mother worried about her friend, so talented, kind, clever, and hard-working, but trapped by poverty, to head to the bad local high school my sister was avoiding. So my mother put a few bugs in the private high school's ear and convinced my sister's friend to apply, and I suspect paid the application fee, and my sister's friend was given a scholarship for full tuition. Her mother was grateful and kept us in their casual circle. After a couple years, we two families went to some event together, and I met my sister's friend's nephew. His mother, sister's friend's much older sister, had turned to drugs and was in jail, and her mother adopted her daughter's son. He was probably about 8 years old and also quite clever. I was surprised when he kept touching my hair and giggling, but I figured it was some kid thing. From my lofty recent status as a teenager, it finally came out that his life had been so constrained, in America, in the 1980s, that he had never seen, much less touched, anyone not of his race, and he was astonished by the texture of my hair. I understand and acknowledge the informal segregation our country still has, but having never even seen someone of another race by the age of 8, having lived his whole life in America, was, and still is, shocking to me. I grew up in a very woodsy area, and living in a city now amazes me how little people understand nature and how freaked out they get by such minor common things. It is so strange to me. Going to my first Catholic mass with my then GF now wife. As someone who is not religious, the very ceremonious flow made me feel like I was in a cult. Now we're married and it's fine, but it was awkward the first time for me. I studied ecology and ethical development in Cambodia for 6 months in college as part of my degree in botany. Learned a lot about waste management and recycling, etc. When I got back to the US, I jumped straight into an bench internship with an environmentally friendly company which used so much plastic with so much reckless abandon I couldn't believe it. Now I walk through a grocery store and it feels like a minefield. Everything is wrapped in freaking plastic wrap. No wonder it's hot in here. Sorta a weird one for me, lol. I'm white, grew up in a typical mostly white suburban community, but I've spent my past 8 years living in Nick and, more recently, Los Angeles. I live in a middle-class neighborhood in La. I'm the only white guy in my group of friends. Parties are always tacos and Modelo, which I love. I've gone to friends' family parties a few times too, and it's always a pretty laid-back affair. A few weeks ago my friend took me with him to his childhood friend's grad party in San Diego. It was a bunch of upper-class white people in a nice house by the beach, all dressed up drinking wine. There was food with vegan and gluten-free labels. It was so weird to me seeing the type of culture I grew up with after so long. It made me sort of uncomfortable. You have been visited by the snake of great corn. You will be blessed with corn for eternities to come, but only if you comment "corn me up." Snake, if you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.